She's Come Undone by Wally Chapter 5. Rita Spite wore windsong perfume and blue eyeliner. She was so tiny she needed a cushion to see over the steering wheel of her green Studebaker. Each morning she drove down to the Women and Infants Hospital in Providence, where she worked as a pediatrics nurse. Like a little china doll, Grandma murmured admiringly, watching Rita's departure. Grandma's church friend, Mrs. Mumphrey, knew Rita's aunt. She had a miscarriage when they were living in Pennsylvania, Grandma confided in me in a whisper. Of course, that's between you and me. Jack Spite, tall and blond, was a disc jockey at WEAS radio. He hosted a talk show called Potpourri, told elephant jokes, and played the kind of farty music my mother listened to on her car radio. He drove a maroon MG with a license plate that said JKSP8. He was 25, 3 years younger than Rita. We were in the middle of a heat wave the afternoon they moved their belongings up the side stairs. I positioned myself on the front porch with sunglasses and a paperback and checked out each exotic item as it passed by. Stereo cabinet, Hawaiian tiki lamps, beanbag chair, matching love seats upholstered in orange fur. Jack took off his t-shirt midway through the job. I checked him out too. From inside, Grandma watched the Spites' caravan of possessions. She trusted neither sports cars nor hairy furniture, but with the week of their arrival, Jack won her over by climbing a borrowed aluminum ladder to the dizzying height of the sloped roof and fastening a loose antenna wire that had been plaguing our TV reception with snow. From the ground below, Grandma and Ma and I watched him, our hands visors at our foreheads. Grandma handed my mother a $10 bill as Jack descended the rungs. "Make him take this, Bernice," she whispered. Ma held the money up to him as he reached the ground. "Here," she said, "this is for you. We insist." "No, really. I was glad to do it," he said. "Thank you anyway." A laughing kind of dance followed, ending with Ma holding him by the hip and stuffing the money in his pants pocket while Grandma and I smiled hard and watched intently. Grandma's blank second-floor ceilings were now a theater of sound, and I became a devoted student of the Spites' routines. They ate supper every night at 6:30, talked while they did their dishes, and watched TV. Their bedroom was exactly above my bedroom, and I woke up at 6 a.m. to their alarm clock. By 6:45, Rita would hurry down the steps in her crisp white uniform, and her Studebaker would rattle out of the alley. Jack stayed in bed until 10 of 8. I could make out his whistling as he dressed. Grandma's cashed in 6 S&H green stamp books for a portable radio and put it on top of the refrigerator. We both abandoned our afternoon soap operas for potpourri. On Tuesdays, her day off, my mother listened too. "He plays such nice music," Ma said one lunchtime as she stood frying us grilled cheese sandwiches and humming along with the McGuire sisters. "He and I have the exact same taste in music." "That's how much you know," I said. "He has to play that corny stuff. He likes rock and roll." Grandma snorted in disbelief. "He does. Yesterday, when he got home from work, he played a Rolling Stones album. He was dancing all by himself. It shook my whole bedroom." Ma said he was probably doing jump jacks. Grandma supposed that if he was dancing at all, she was sure it was with his wife. "Okay, fine. Don't believe me," I said. "You two love him so much. I just thought you might be interested." The Spites went to the same Sunday Mass as us, and by the second week, Monsignor had nabbed Jap and passed the collection basket. He winked at me and jingled the change as it passed by my face. My heart pounded almost audibly as I watched him work the pews. One time I caught Ma following his movements too, lip-syncing to the offertory prayer rather than praying it. When she saw me watching her, she jerked her eyes back to her missal, and cleared her throat, praying louder. Out in the parking lot one Sunday after the services, Rita appeared at the Skylark's side window and tapped against the glass with her wedding ring. Ma braked hard. Grandma practically slid off the front seat. "Hi, you guys," Rita said. "Jackie and I were wondering if you'd like to come upstairs to dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just some tacos and my world-famous chili con carne. I imagined Grandma lunging again at the description of the menu, but not even the threat of spicy foreign food could keep her away. "Why, that sounds lovely," she said. "We'll be there, won't we, girls?" Girls, I chuckled to myself, as if we were the Marvelettes. Shortly before we left to go upstairs that evening, Ma made Grandma promise that she'd keep still if she saw anything she didn't like. "You're telling me how to behave properly, Bernice?" Grandma said. "If I were you, I'd just button up that second blouse button and worry about myself." We clumped up the back steps, my mother carrying a bottle of wine, Grandma armed with a package of Mylanta tablets. Rita answered the door wearing a red velvet sombrero with pom-poms. "Olé!" she said. Ma laughed louder than necessary and pushed the wine at her. I was in love with what they had done to the apartment. A bookcase made out of cinder blocks and plain boards had held dozens of paperback romances. The bottom shelf was bowed down with the weight of what looked like over 100 record albums. I sank into one of the beanbag chairs and gazed up at the saddest, most striking painting I'd ever seen. A Negro girl on black velvet. She was clutching a rag doll to her chest. One glistening tear, so fat and wet it looked real, sat stomped on her cheek. Grandma declined Jack's offer to relax on the fur recliner and requested a straight-back kitchen chair instead. She sat down, one hand on each knee, and I saw the painting catch her eye as well. She stared at it for some time. "Say, that's quite a picture," she said finally to Jack, "and I'm not overly fond of the colors." Both the Spites doted lavishly on Grandma, in just the ways she liked. Rita acquired about Grandma's blood pressure and knew exactly the pill she was taking for it. When we were called to the kitchen, Rita reached in the oven with a polka dot mitt and extracted a little homemade chicken pot pie. "I thought you might prefer something a little milder, Mrs. Holland," she said. Grandma's initials had been poked into the crust with fork holes. "Well, you are just the cleverest thing," Grandma cooed, patting Rita's hand. "It's so pretty I hate to eat it." Ma plunked herself right down between the Spites. I got stuck sitting next to Grandma. Jack kept refilling my mother's glass with the wine she had brought. With each sip she acted more and more like Marilyn Monroe. Grandma was so taken with her special meal she seemed hardly to notice Ma's behavior. She even reluctantly accepted a glass of wine herself and went so far as to wet her lips with the rim. Passing the chili bowl, Jack suddenly turned his attention to me. "So what does Dolores Del Rio do with herself all summer long?" he asked. "Who's she?" I said. "You don't know Dolores Del Rio, Latin beauty of the silver screen?" "I'll tell you what she does with herself all day," Grandma butted in. "She sits in the kitchen and listens to certain so-and-so on the radio. You have yourself quite an admirer." I could have stomped her foot. "Me?" I snapped. "You should talk." "Dolores Del Rio is exactly who she's named after," Ma said. "When I was a teenager, I saw Journey into the Fear about 50 times. You know what Dolores means?" Jack asked me. I shrugged. "It's Latin, means sadness, Our Lady of Sorrow. Why are you so sad?" The four of them were watching me. I looked down at the table, and the room went silent. Suddenly, I was sad, overwhelmed with sadness. "Who's sad?" I said. Ma began telling a complicated joke that she had heard at work. Then she stopped and whooped, throwing her head back so far I could see her fillings. "Oh no," she said, "I have forgotten the punchline." Jack teased her, and she reached over and poked him. He poked her back. Rita laughed and passed the seconds. The Mexican food tasted fiery and delicious. I wiped the sweat off my top lip and watched Jack drink his wine. "You know what?" I said. "The stuff is exactly the same color as your car." It had come out spontaneously. I felt immediately stupid. Jack grinned at me. "Mrs. Holland," he said, "the descendant of yours is a genius. Now, if only she'd quit swiping money out of the church collection basket." Caught her off guard, Grandma was momentarily startled before she realized the joke. Then her eyes shimmered behind the gold-rimmed glasses, and she reached over and sipped and slapped Jax timidly on the arm. "You keep telling fibs and I'll give you a licking," she chuckled. Jack grabbed the red sombrero and placed it squarely on Grandma's small head. It sank down, bending one of her ears forward. I held my breath, waiting for Grandma to bring the evening to an abrupt halt. Instead, amazingly, the pom-poms began to rock with her laughter. It was the first time I had ever seen her risk foolishness. That night, I lay in bed with the evening's images spinning before me. I felt energized, as if an electrical current were passing through me. Sleep was impossible, I told myself, then dozed, lulled by all the answers to the questions of why I was so sad. I awoke in stages, puzzled by unfamiliar squeaking sound. Half asleep, I imagined it was Jeanette Nord's kittens, loose somehow in my room, and then I realized suddenly and totally what it was. The screeching and creaking of bed springs above my head. Low, murmuring voices followed, nothing like their doing dishes talking. Please was the only word, Rita's, that I could make out. I knew I had no business listening, that I should be blocking them out with sober thoughts. Jesus dying on the cross, bullets ripping through President Kennedy's head, ink needles stuck into Roberta's customers. But my thigh muscles shook, and my mind raced wonderfully with what, during a girls-only assembly, Sister Margaret Francis had called impure thoughts. I kept imagining them up there, half-naked and feverish, like lovers on the covers of paperbacks. I drew my pillow slowly towards me, kissing it first with my mouth closed and then with it open. The tip of my tongue poked out, touching the dry, fuzzy cloth. "Please," I whispered, "please." The following morning I slept through their preparations for work. At 10:30 I dragged myself out of bed and downstairs, ate 2 bowls of Cocoa Puffs, and thumbed haphazardly through The Nun Story, the book Rita had lent me the night before. "Those clothes you were going to take off the line yesterday are still there," Grandma said, passing through the kitchen. I picked a random chapter and began reading. She yapped on about the housework. Girls in her day, how fortunate it was that school was starting up again in 2 weeks. After lunch, I listened to Jack's program on the radio. I half expected to hear a song dedication to Dolores Del Rio or something referencing to our Mexican meal, but the closest he came was playing a record by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Later, Grandma stood between me and As the World Turns, her hands clasped on her hips. I was slumped sideways on one of the parlor chairs, blowing under a ball of lint in a half-hearted attempt to keep it afloat. "Those clothes are still waiting out there, Miss Itchy Britches," she said, "and your breakfast and lunch dishes are still in the sink. In my day, a lazy girl got a licking." "Fine," I said. "Stick out your tongue and lick me." She walked over and slapped me on the arm, harder than I expected. Hard enough for it to sting. And they didn't sass their elders, either. "What are you tickling me for?" I said. At 4 o'clock I heard Jack's MG in the alley, his footsteps up the back down the stairs. The water pipes groaned, and I knew he was out back washing his car. On my way up the staircase, Uncle Eddie's picture smirked at me from behind glass. From my vantage point, behind the bathroom curtains, I watched him appear and disappear behind the sheets and towels that waved and fluttered on the line. Ma's and my personal stuff was out there too. 2 of Ma's black bras and several pairs of my gnarled up underpants, including the one with the rippy waist. Jack was wearing cutoffs and a faded inside-out sweatshirt with the sleeves cut off. No shoes or socks. He whistled and sudsed up the little car. I thought of the way Rita's lip curled unattractively against her gum when she laughed. She was cute, not pretty. She should do something with that short, flat hair. As she was, she just didn't deserve him. He squatted and scrubbed his wire wheels. His legs were muscly, more furry than I imagined. At the dinner the night before, Ma had acted so... that word kids had written on the opinion book. Leaning over and giving him those little slaps whenever he teased her. Horny, that was the word. Ma and her stupid wrist and her black lace bras. The green garden hose snaked between his legs. He sloshed and sprayed and wiped down the chrome. On his way past the clothesline, he looked right at my underpants, and then he went up the stairs inside. Audrey Hepburn, on the cover of the Nun story, was staring up at me from my unmade bed. Her hair was hidden by her snow-white wimple. Her big eyes looked frightened. "What are you looking at?" I said. "Fuck you." It was the first time I had ever said the word. I felt a brief shiver of power. Then I sat back on the bed and sobbed. Dolores Price, Lady of Sorrow. When Ma got home from work, I stood at the top of the stairs and eavesdropped on Grandma's complaints. "If you didn't just let her, as long as she's living in this house." "I'll talk to her," Ma said. "I'll take the clothes in." When she came upstairs and knocked, I had my defense, my punchline, ready to go. "Why don't you just stop acting like a teenager?" I'd say. "Why don't you just grow up and stop embarrassing everyone?" But instead of criticizing, Ma sat down and put her arm around me. "Let's you and me go to the show tomorrow," she suggested. "Or shopping or something." The top of the Skylark was up, the afternoon gray and rainy. My mother and I were on our way back from our day in Providence. We'd left in the morning and bought breakfast, then 2 new school uniforms for me, and mohair sweaters for both of us. We'd waited half an hour in line as well to see the matinee of A Hard Day's Night. But girls in front and back of us were screaming at the glassed-in movie posters. Ma had forgotten her medication and didn't think her nerves could take it. I pouted briefly and then settled for Mary Poppins. "What's your idea of a cute guy?" I asked Ma. "I don't know," she said. "Someone tall, dark, and loaded. How about Vic Damone? Is he available?" "Seriously," I said. "Do you think someone like, say, Jack is handsome?" She tapped the brake for no reason, I could see. Then she laughed. "Jack who? Jack Frost? Jack Benny?" "Our Jack. Jack from upstairs." "Oh, I don't know," she said. "I never really thought about it. He and Rita make a cute couple, don't they? She's a living doll." She reached over and turned on the radio. "She has a huge mouth. You're too critical sometimes. I think she's cute." "Do you think Jack looks anything like your brother? That picture of him in the stairs reminds me of Jack." "Eddie? Not really." "Well, now that you mention it, Eddie was darker than Jack, though. Shorter, too." She turned the radio off. The windshield wipers made little squeaks. "I wish it wasn't almost September," I said. "I hate that school. I don't have any friends." "This year will be different," she said. "God, 8th grade. I can't believe it. If I still hate it, can I switch schools?" "You won't hate it," she said. "I'm not even answering that. Light me a cigarette, will you?" I struck the match, sucked in, passed it to her, and then I lit one for myself. We smoked in silence, the Skylark's tires hissing through the wet streets. "How come you and Grandma will never talk about the Uncle Eddie?" "Who said I don't talk about him? What do you want to know?" "I don't know. Did you cry when you found out that he had drowned?" "Yeah, sure I cried." "Did he ever see me before he died?" "Oh, plenty of times. You were about a year old. He used to tease me because you weren't a boy. Used to hold you and call you Fred. Oh, God, that funeral was awful. He was always so full of life." "Did Grandma cry?" Ma flicked the wipers. "I don't know. Maybe. Not in front of me. She didn't even cry for her own kid. She was angry about it. Did a lot of slamming, I remember. Pot lids, kitchen cabinets. Eddie was kind of wild. He always took chances." "Risk?" I said. I hated Grandma, that cold bitch. "Julie Andrews played a good part in that movie today, didn't she?" Ma said. "She seems so sweet." "She's probably a big spoiled snot in real life." I clicked the radio back on and twisted the knob until I found WEAS. A song ended and Jack came on. I turned it up loud. His voice filled the car. "The eyebrows, maybe," Ma said. "What?" "He resembles Eddie a little around the eyebrows." those blue eyes that look like they're cooking up trouble. When we got home, I took the radio upstairs to my bedroom rather than look at Grandma. I tried on one of the new uniforms. Even the next biggest size was snug. Even the next biggest size was snug. Jack told an elephant joke. Then I heard an organ beginning of Our Day Will Come. I'd given Jeanette the 45 for a birthday present. We used to sing it together in harmony in the Nord's back seat. Jeanette hadn't written back in months. I got up and locked my bedroom door. My hairbrush was a microphone. I sang into the mirror to Jack's mischievous blue eyes. Our day will come if we just wait a while. My lips moving around the words of the song made me feel sexy and sad. With my free hand, I reached up under the uniform. So what, I told myself. If Rita, Grandma's little China doll, can do it. I closed my eyes, and the hairbrush dropped to the floor. My hands wandered inside my thighs, back and forth against my wet underpants. Eddie's hands. Jack's.